Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cinema Flow podcast. I'm your host, Zach Abdelbaki, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, Mr. Kent Jones. He is the director of the new film Late Fame, starring Willem Dafoe and Greta Lee. The film follows a legendary New York poet, Ed Saxberger, as his forgotten works captivate an eccentric group of young creatives, reigniting his artistic passion. Their intrigue intertwines with the bewitching presence of actress Gloria, played by Greta Lee. Late Fame will be released in movie theaters on August 7th. It's a fantastic film. I highly recommend that you all check it out. Now, please welcome to the show the director of Late Fame, Mr. Kent Jones. Hello, sir. How are you doing today?
How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for taking the time. I really enjoyed the film. I thought it was excellent. I gave the audience
Good.
a little taste of the plot, but in your own words, can you tell the audience what it's about and how you got involved with it?
Yeah, it is about a guy who works in the post office named Ed Saxberger, played by Willem Dafoe, who was confronted one day on his way home from work by a guy named Myers, played by Edmund Donovan, who says, "I read your book from 40 years ago, and you're just great. And my group wants to meet you." And he says, "What's your group?" And he's lured back into the idea of writing poetry again and of his youthful moment and of kind of reliving his youth. And along the way meets a woman who is part of the group, Gloria, played by Greta Lee, and they come close to having a kind of an encounter, but it never really happens. And then he's up against it at the moment when he thinks his poem is going to be read by her, but he has to read it himself, and it's an older poem. And I don't know. Is that enough?
No, that's a good description, and it's a
Okay.
fantastic script by Sammy Birch, who wrote May
Mhm.
December, and
Yeah,
is she's very versatile because Coyote versus Acme. She also wrote, which is coming out,
I know.
and I feel like this is a strong script because the way each character speaks is very different from one another. So, like,
Mm.
what can you tell about Myers from the way he speaks versus the way Saxberger speaks, and then Gloria? They're all very different.
The way that Myers speaks comes from someone who's practicing speaking in a certain way, so that he has made a conscious decision to how can I put it, enact a kind of way of speaking that he perceives as noteworthy, I guess you would say. Ed actually calls him out. He says, "Where are you from?" He says, "You have a very different way of speaking." He says, "So I there's too much umming and ahhing in the world." And I think that it's cultivated. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Absolutely. I
Mhm.
also want to talk about the cinematography for the minute because
Mhm.
the film looks beautiful. You have like a handheld style with beautiful natural lighting and a
Yeah.
1.66 to 1 aspect ratio. Can you
Yeah.
tell me about some of the conversations you had with your cinematographer about how you wanted to approach the visual style of the movie? And also, I'm curious if it was shot on 35 millimeter film because it looked like it was, but I'm not sure.
Wyatt Garfield is the DP, and this is the second time we've worked together, and we work hand in glove now. I mean, I have he and costume designer Carissa Kelly are two of my key collaborators. Carissa Kelly is also my collaborator in life. She and I are married. And that's how we met. I hired her as the costume designer for Diane. As far as, and it's interesting because cinematography and costume design and production design go hand in hand, but they each have their own separate disciplines. And so with Wyatt, I absolutely made the decision early on that I wanted to go more in the direction of handheld. Diane was largely not handheld. There's very little of it there, but that's a different kind of movie. I wanted it for this because I wanted to be more responsive to what was happening in the moment between the actors, the characters, how they were reacting to each other, and it shot most scenes with two cameras. And 166 just felt like the right aspect ratio. The whole question of like aspect ratios used to be very tortured because you would try to figure out what lens you were going to use in the booth. But the thing is that you can pretty much do. I mean, Wes Anderson uses every aspect ratio known to man in every movie now. I think we were both very comfortable shooting in that format. We both really liked it. It's interesting because it's a format that I think I found doing research back in the 90s. It's a format that kind of nobody really ever shot 166. They shot for 133 or they shot for 185. 166 was sort of like the in between. At any rate, we also, I wanted a very warm look, but I just wanted something that was going to be very responsive to the characters and to the skin tones of the actors, the beauty of their faces. I really wanted the faces to light the movie, so to speak.
Yeah, and it looked
Mm.
really good. And one lens choice that I was curious about is, like, for example, when Ed and Myers are walking in the park. They're framed in
Hmm.
like a two shot, and I think it's like
Hmm.
a more wide lens. But then later, when it's Ed
Hmm.
and Gloria on the bench, you're using very long lenses, and the background's very blurry. So I'm curious about what goes into decisions like that.
Because the Willem and or Ed and Myers, when they're talking, that's a they're talking and walking, and it's a oneer, so to speak. I liked it that way because it's sustained. Usually, moments like that don't, but with the two of them, it really did. With It's interesting that you talk about the moment between Ed and Gloria because it was shot in a very odd way. It was turned vertical,
Oh, interesting.
and then the middle was framed out. It was an idea that someone else had brought up with me that they did in another film, and I thought, well, let's try that because we wanted it to be a little bit off because they had just done mushrooms, and so it has a slightly dreamy feel to it where the focus just sort of like falls off, and I really like it. It's not too much, but it really gives you it brings the faces into a different relationship with the camera. And no, it's not 35. It was yeah,
It looked like
shot
it
with
though, which is a compliment.
well, I think now it's possible to get film, to get digital to the point where it really does. I think earlier on, the grain looked like it was more applied from a great height, so to speak. I think that now you can do, and that's, probably in advance thanks to AI, but you can really do more with the LUT. I'm very happy with the way it looks.
Yeah, all very thoughtful choices. I also appreciated the contrast and the lighting between the scenes with Ed's new younger friends versus the scene with his older friends playing billiards in the ball. I feel like that was more
Sure.
cool and the scenes of the younger people were a bit more warm. Can you talk about that choice? And then also about what Ed is going through in the scene where he goes to see his old friends? Because it's almost like he's living two different lives at that point in the story.
The warmth of the scene he's of the scenes, I should say, where he's with the guys, because it's true of the Italian restaurant that they go to. Those scenes definitely. It's the nature of the spaces for one thing. That's for sure. But the cafe where they gather, not so warm in the middle. In the moment when he says, "I'm not going to write another poem." That's a little bit different. But it needed to have that kind of warmth because it's like it's the kind of place that doesn't exist in New York anymore, but that did. And I wanted it to be a little bit out of time like that, and to have that kind of, comfort, old furniture, paintings on the walls, et cetera, et cetera. And you feel like you could just, sit there all afternoon. You don't have to keep ordering stuff, and get comfortable. On the other hand, the bar with his friends is just a bar, and it reflects the nature of the place, that it's kind of unadorned and just, a bar with a pool table and some lights up. And that's about it. Again, this is where lighting, DP, production design, where it all kind of like comes into play.
That's fascinating. And it all comes together in the editing room, which I want to ask you about. You have some very creative montages in here, like the scene where Ed is struggling to write a new poem. You do a great job pacing the film. It's only like 96 minutes and it flies by. So, can you talk about working with your editor and how the film may have changed from the first cut to the final cut?
Yeah, the first cut. Well, look, I mean, it's that famous and absolutely correct statement that George Lucas made. If you look at your first cut and you don't want to run out of the room and throw up, there's something wrong. I do know a filmmaker who told me that he looked at a first assembly of something that he had just shot, and he said, "Yeah, it was just kind of great. It felt like it was all there." And but it's like, I guess he was right. I don't know. But that's the only time I've ever heard somebody say that. And I mean,
I feel
it's
like that would have to be like 1917 or something where it's all tracking shots.
no comment. But no, it wasn't 1917. What a movie. Can I just make a side comment and
Yeah,
just
go
say,
for
I
it.
think that the lure of making these single shot extravaganzas is just a really wrong-headed move. First of all, you can always tell where the digital stitching comes in. Second of all, it's hell on the actors. I mean, not that, the guy in 1917, George, who plays the lead, is magnificent. I mean, he's great. And there's some nice things in the film, but it's really hard. And it's really hard in the storytelling too. Anyway,
Yeah, how this cut evolved from the first one to the
well,
end.
I mean, it's just every cut evolves. I don't know, Mike and I have worked together. We cut Diane together and done some other stuff together, and we work. really closely. But I think film is, fundamentally, I think that film is a rhythm, and you have to find the rhythm in the editing room, not apply it. That's a very important thing. And it does remind me of this Bob Dylan quote, sometimes the beat gets in the way of the rhythm. It's just sort of like, you think of it as like a pacemaker, sometimes when people push them, the rhythm of the movie to the point where they lose the rhythm of the movie, with the editing. You find the rhythm through what exists, what you shot. And I think that I remember, Claire Denis and I had a conversation once where she was just saying, we were talking about editing, and she said it's beautiful to take things out. And it just is. She's 100% right about that. It's like, because when you remove things, then you create a space sometimes that allows for the story to enlarge with what isn't there, but what's imagined. That means really, really close attention to everything, because, you lose a frame here, add a frame there, it changes the whole thing. And so in ways that's why it's always hard to look at somebody's rough cut, somebody
Absolutely.
else's rough cut. So I think that I don't have a specific answer for you. I just think that it's always something that happens. In terms of the montages, I think that you're talking about basically the one dream that he has, after he's just been with Gloria. And, I knew that I wanted to have something where the memories of Soho converge with what, happens with her. And it's just something that took a while to get right. But there was a lot of stuff that we shot for it, the cobblestones and the light on the buildings and Soho and so on.
Yeah, that was all really good. And one other moment that I noticed the editing being really good is in right at during the reading when someone says like "Okay, Grandpa," and then you kind of like drown out the sound and like put us in
Yeah.
his space. I thought that was really creative, and it reminded me of the golden rule of YouTube: never look at the comments.
Never
But
look at the comments anywhere. I don't know, yeah, that took a while to get there because, in the story, in the Schnitzler story, someone says, poor old guy. And, that was, Sammy had that in the script. And the thing is that when we were looking at it, we realized that, Willem reads the poem, he does a really good job. And so we didn't want something to be that didn't hit the note that seemed like it fit with the performance. And so it took a while to figure out what was going to be said, and then way to go, Grandpa seemed like something that someone would think was encouraging or something like that, but that wasn't finding the right voice for it. It was actually Mike's wife, the editor's wife. And then drowning the sound out so that I know that there have been moments that I've experienced in my own life where something embarrassing or big or, suddenly very troubling happens in a conversation or in a public exchange. And you have this sort of like thing that goes on in your head where you hear a ringing in your ears. And so, that was more or less what I wanted to do there. And it took a while to get that right too, but to figure out what we were hearing and what we weren't hearing. And I have to say that working on both films, both of my, this and Diane with Laura Hirschberg doing the mix, who's an old friend of mine, and was just, a joy. But getting the idea down in the cutting room and then refining it in the mix took some doing.
yeah, and Willem Dafoe's performance really, brings that all together. And I'm
Mm.
curious about what it was like working with him. And also, are you the type of director who likes to have a lot of deep conversations about like the character's backstory and history and like taking from the novella in that way? Or are you more like, let him do his thing type of like restrained director?
Well, I mean, when it's needed, because most actors don't need that because they're intelligent. They figure it out on their own. Mary Kay Weiss went into a lot of detail about Diane's, earlier life, and it was just like that all sounds fine. With Willem and I, though, when we were talking, we were both so like-minded. The only question that I had, I was thinking, what was it that made him walk away from poetry? And Willem was just like, look, I mean, it's people had that moment in their life when a scene falls apart, and you're just like, I got to make a living, and oh, there's an opportunity at the post office, and it's a union job, and it good benefits, and et cetera. So, you just sort of fall into things. And it is poetry. It's not, he didn't drop away from filmmaking or, composing music, or something like that. So it's poetry is not about making a living. Poetry is something that you live that lives with you, and it can be made under any circumstances at all economically. And so it's just kind of like, the scene dies away. And for some people, that's the end. But that was a very quick decision. And apart from that, I think with him, it was more with every actor, it's different. And every actor needs something different. And they want to communicate with them in the way that they want you to communicate. And so he and I would do a take. He'd say, any thoughts? And I'd be like, I don't know, not really, but why don't we do another one? And because we had worked out so much in advance, and he's so committed to, as all good actors are, the moment and the truth of the moment, that I'm not going to sit there and say, oh, well, why don't you close your eyes here and then, you say the next line, with a pause and then blah, blah, blah. That's just not what's going to happen. But with every actor, it's different. You have to be there for them when they need it.
Absolutely. I mean, he's one of the greatest of all times. And I was curious, what is like your relationship with poetry? Because personally, I hate to admit, I haven't read a lot of poetry, although this movie made me want to go out and seek some. But are you a fan of poetry, or and what's your relationship with it, I guess, as an artist?
That was part of the lure in a way because of the project, because the film is dedicated to a guy named Peter Gizzi, who's one of my oldest friends in the world and who is a great poet. He appears very briefly at the end of the movie, sitting there reading a book in the penultimate scene when they have the confrontation. And when I was young, let's just say, and Pete and I would get together. I gave him cinema, he gave me poetry. Let's put it that way. So that, we spent a lot of time reading poetry together and a lot of time talking about poetry, a lot of time seeing movies and talking about movies. And, a lot of time also listening to poets, and poetry and the music that you hear at the beginning of the movie, all those things flow together, that moment. And so, yeah, it was very important to me that I got the kind of poetry right that I knew. There are a lot of different schools of poetry, but I also wanted to get the voices of actual poets into the movie. And they're all poets that I admire, but also people that we were listening to: Pound, Williams, H.D., Lorraine Niedecker, Jimmy Schuyler. It's James Schuyler, to be precise about it. It's just get the names right. I didn't want it to be sort of like a fake poetry movie.
This is a great New York movie. I love how they talk about the way the city has changed over the decades. I'm
Mm.
curious if you have any favorite or underrated New York movies that you'd like to shout out.
Underrated. I don't know. I don't know what's underrated now. Mean Streets is obviously a very well-known movie, but it's a real flashpoint for me, as it is for a lot of other people for many reasons. Marty and I are, that's a different relationship. But also the movie that he made before that, Who's That Knocking at My Door, which is not so easy to see at the moment, but should be made more easy. And then his documentary about his parents, Italian American, which is, readily available now, thanks to Criterion. I think those are beautiful New York movies.
Yeah. What about a
Yeah.
favorite movie theater in New York?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I practically, film forum's like a second home to me. I just love it.
Yeah.
Bruce Goldstein is one of my best friends, and, he programs the repertory stuff at Film Forum. One other New York movie, by the way, that comes to mind, though, that I think isn't really thought of as a New York movie a lot, is Ice by Robert Kramer, with my pal, Paul McIsaac, and other people. It's just like, it's a really, Kramer was a really good, interesting filmmaker. And yeah, that's a good movie.
One that came to mind while watching your movie, although yours is very different, but it's While We're Young by Noah Baumbach.
No, I see. Yeah, I got it. Yeah.
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 And I love how your film shows what it's like to be friends with people of a different generation. Have you noticed a difference in how people of an older generation respond to the film versus people of a younger generation?
I'll be honest with you. I'm very heartened by the fact that younger people do respond to the film the way that they do. I'm not sure if it's a big dramatic difference. I expected it to be, but it kind of isn't, which is interesting. They just respond to it on different wavelengths, obviously, because you're coming at it from different times with different levels of experience. And we closed a film festival in Geneva, which was great. And a woman came up to me afterwards who's probably in her 30s, and she was just sobbing. The film just affected her in a very particular way. She's a filmmaker, actually, from Italy, whose work I didn't know. That was interesting to me because I did want to just deal in some way with the dilemma that a lot of younger people feel right now. I hope I did
Yeah, it did for me for
justice
sure.
to it. Yeah.
Yeah, I really
Mm.
appreciated it. And the ending was like, what's that saying? Surprising but inevitable. I'm not going to spoil it,
Mhm.
obviously, but like the,
You
last
mean his
conversation.
conversation with Lynn?
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly.
Yeah. I mean,
Very poignant. And, I also, as we wrap up here, I really enjoyed your film Hitchcock Truffaut, which I watched during film history class in film school. I really loved it. And also, I watched Diane in the lead up to this interview, and I really enjoyed it. I'm curious, are there any plans for upcoming films? Are there any scripts you might be working on and getting to once this film is released?
yeah, there are a few. There's a script that I was very close to making. And then COVID happened and then the strikes happened. So it was just sort of like boom, boom. So I'm rewriting it now for a different actress who I want to work with again. And I also, there's a script that I wrote the first draft of it like, Jesus, man, I don't know, 40 years ago or something. I mean, really, and it went through many, 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 many different iterations. I got close to making that in around 2012 or so. And it's at a point now where it's tight as a drum 40 years later. So it's sort of, I think I'm going to have a conversation with somebody next week. And I think that that's on the horizon. And there's something else that I can't really talk about, but that's by a script by someone else that I want to make happen.
Well, sir, I want to sincerely thank you for taking the time to speak with me. This is a truly remarkable film. It's my favorite one you've made so far, and
Mm.
I hope I get to speak with you again someday, maybe for your next film.
Oh, great. I've enjoyed it. Thank you so much, Zach.
Of course. And before we go, I just want to remind the audience that they should all go check out Late Fame. It will be released in movie theaters on August 7th. There will be a link to buy tickets in the description. And that does it for today's episode of the Cinema Flow podcast. Thank you all for listening. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.